Hello, everybody. I'm here today to talk about the fact paper, and there are kind of three parts to this video, not necessarily three videos, but three different parts. I want to kind of talk about what this fact paper is going to be like, broad strokes. And then secondly, I'm going to go through the fact paper requirements, kind of concentrating on some of the things on the fact paper requirement handout. And then thirdly, I thought I would use the topic of depression and anxiety and run that through and kind of block it as far as what I would do in the introduction, what I would do in the concession, suggested topic sentences, and what I do in the conclusion. So, number one, to prepare for this fact paper, please make sure you have read in Chapter 6 of Elements of Argument these pages, 164 through 165. Not a lot, but read it carefully. Also, in Elements of Argument, read Chapter 7, pages 190 through 202. This paper is going to be very similar to the value paper, but it'll be easier, I promise. And the reason I believe it's going to be easier for you is because instead of looking for scholarly, value-oriented and value-centered analysis, we're looking for more factual kinds of stuff. In your discussion thread 4, you were to have found a journal article on your topic and examine the evidence. And in the evidence, you're looking for the kinds of things that I want to see in your fact paper in the support, which would be 1, case studies. Recent studies, longevity studies are the best. Longevity meaning 40,000 people tested over a 6-year span, for example, where you have significant numbers so the conclusions have some real weight. 2, statistics. I want statistics peppered all over this paper. Again, we're looking for the quantitative as opposed to the qualitative that was characterizing the value paper. Thirdly, we want experts, as we did before. We're looking mostly for journal kinds of experts. You're going to have a lot of journals in this paper, in this fact paper. PhDs, and we are hoping for this paper to have in your body paragraphs, and there will be again 7, 4 different sources. I've got to have that consensus. 3 is okay, but ideally 4. You get 4 different sources supporting one topic sentence. That A is sufficient evidence, which is important, and B, each of these sources will be providing additional factual information. Mini definition. And I'm imagining your definition will be coming from a journal, and I imagine that your definition will be in your lead-in. A lot of you don't understand the purpose of a lead-in. A, they were considered throwaways if there was no source in your introduction. B, don't start providing support for your thesis before I've even seen it. I crossed that whole thing out. That is not the purpose of a lead-in. The purpose of the lead-in is to put whatever your topic is within contemporary cultural context, and that might include a definition. The rhetoric and language is going to be very important. I want subject-specific language, so whatever kinds of language and vocabulary and linguistics and rhetoric they use in the journal articles about whatever topic you're doing, mimic that, copy that. I don't want a chatty, folksy tone. I want this elegant, I want it sophisticated, and I want it to sound like the sources you are reading in the tone and in the language. Inferences. None of you are going to have a throwaway conclusion. You will have about 3 different sources in your conclusion, but specifically you're going to be giving me inferences. And there is a handout on inference. Bottom line, an inference is something that the journals say in their concluding paragraphs based on the facts. And I'm going to want 3 or 4 of them in your conclusion. And then we also want you to find, out of all the research you do, 1 diagram or 1 chart. So you've got pages 164 and 165, and then 190 through 202 to read in Elements. You already have 2 journal articles, one that you did for discussion thread 4, and the second article you did for your critique, which has already been handed in. And next, you have 2 fact samples. Make sure you look at these. You might want to, for example, see how we document the appendix and how we document the notes. You'll notice that the thesis is italicized. You'll notice that the inferences in the conclusion are italicized, not the entire inference, just the word. For example, the infinitive, to infer, or the gerund, inferring. So there are a few little mechanical details. We'll have again, the thesis italicized. We'll have the inferences and the conclusion italicized. We'll have 1 appendix, and I'm going to explain next how to document that, and 2 content endnotes. So that is kind of that. Now, secondly, I'm going to go through some of these fact paper handouts, and then I'll get into the model, the prototype that I'm going to have to kind of demonstrate how I would block all of this. I want about 2,000 words to 2,500. The biggest flaw in even the best papers I received, they were too long. Good writers know how to be terse, how to distill, how to crystallize. One of the things that I've been trying to teach you all how to do is to digest and nail, and not give me these play-by-plays. They're arduous to read. They're not very readable. You need to learn to paraphrase and digest. But about 2,500 words. I really do not literally want more than 10 paragraphs, intro, concession, 7 body, and conclusion. And I do not want any of these paragraphs 1 smidgen longer than 3/4 of a page, or I will be punitive grade-wise. They're just too long. And the longer it takes me to read the paper, the worse the grade normally. So please try to keep to these parameters. These are simply skills that all good writers know that I'm sharing with you. I don't want any dictionaries or encyclopedias or handbooks, no handbooks or textbooks, and absolutely no websites. You are only allowed to go to the subscription services, i.e. ProQuest, EBSCOhost, ScienceDirect. A lot of you are using subscription services that I don't even are terribly familiar with. That's excellent. I love that. But absolutely no Atlantic.com or NewYorkTimes.com. Either it's print, which in that case you have nothing after the date, or ProQuest if you got it from the subscription service. And we'll talk about all of these things, of course, in the value conference. I want at least 8 academic journals, meaning the peer-reviewed with the sources at the back. I want a really good fact thesis. Instead of using the word because between the argumentative edge and the 3 concrete, specific, logical, controlling ideas that make up the rational basis, I want as evidenced by, and I will be demonstrating that later. In the concession, if you're arguing the negative effects, you will have to acknowledge that some people, for example, see sleep deprivation as in conjunction with light therapy treatment for depression. And not all lack of sleep constitutes sleep deprivation. And in some cases, older people in particular don't need a lot of sleep. If you're doing the genetic biological cause, then in your concession, you would have the dysfunctional, and the cultural environment. Notes. I want 2 in your paper. A note is simply a tidbit or a snippet of information you want to sneak into your paper to give it more dimension that does not warrant a citation. So for example, if you were talking about a certain kind of measuring mechanism, an index, you might superscript that at the top, at the end of the word, kind of up at the top, superscript 1. I would go to your note page, and there would be superscript 1, and you would explain, identify, elaborate on that particular measuring mechanism, that index. Or you might have a particular author, a particular source, a particular scholar you want to elaborate on, or a particular study you want to elaborate on, something you want to sneak in that you don't want to take up space in your paper to explain, but I need 2 of them. And it simply is a superscript in text, a little 1, a little 2, and then a separate page following your text, your conclusion, then a separate page that has pagination, has notes, superscript 1, identify that, superscript 2, identify that. And if either of your notes has a citation that goes with it, then I need the last name or the last 2 names, the last name et al, and the page number, and then I need that source on your works cited page. And I need an appendix also. The best diagram, the best chart, the best figure. Again, this will have a separate page, pagination, appendix. Over to the left, you will call it figure 1 or chart 1 or visual 1. Then I want a title. Make sure all of this is double spaced. Provide the appendix and make it fit the page nicely. Clip all the extraneous material around it. It might be, for example, figure 32, and that would look silly to have figure 1 and then figure 32 in a little teeny print. So clip all of that, and then give me about a 2 or 3 sentence explanation of how this figure relates to your thesis, and then source it. So flush with the figure 1, the left margin, give me a source, then a colon, and then just like an in-text citation, the last name or 2 names or last name et al, and the page number. And then also, I need that source on the works cited page. Even if that chart is the only thing you're taking from that journal article, probably, I want that journal article on the works cited page. And I will account for the appendix, and if indeed you have sources for either of your notes, I will account for those before I start reading the paper with an internal check. Now, I thought lastly, and this is probably going to go into part 2, I'm going to take depression and anxiety. That's going to be the topic that I'm going to use. And I'm going to try to demonstrate as best I can how I would, according to the parameters of the fact paper, how I would strategize and block and provide architecture for this particular topic. So in the introduction, we begin with the thesis, and I have chosen, out of the hypothetical research I've done, to argue that depression and anxiety, especially for teenagers, I'm going to stipulate the demographic, is mostly caused, I think you've got to have a qualifier, because these are arguable, mostly caused by the cultural environment. So I'm going to read you my thesis, and then we're going to block the paper. Depression and anxiety, comma, especially for teenagers, comma, is mostly caused by the cultural environment, as evidenced by increased social media, comma, academic pressure, comma, and frightening events such as mass shootings and COVID-19. In the lead-in, the 9 sentences prior to the thesis, because the introduction has a lead-in and then the thesis, you need to